The world had changed. It wasn't just the chaos of the undead that had destroyed civilization, it was the erosion of humanity's identity. What had once been a thriving planet of vibrant cities and diverse cultures now lay in ruin, overtaken by the relentless march of the zombie horde. Yet, in the darkest corners of this ravaged world, a fragile hope remained. A group of survivors, known as the Memory Keepers, had discovered a strange power hidden deep within humanity's memories. It wasn't technology or weapons that kept them alive, but the stories, the experiences, the memories of the past that had been passed down through generations. These recollections, long thought of as mere nostalgia, had turned into a potent weapon in the battle against the undead. In the heart of an abandoned city, surrounded by crumbling buildings and the ever-present shadow of the undead, the Memory Keepers gathered in a hidden bunker. Their leader, Elias, had always believed that memories were the key to reclaiming the world. But he wasn't entirely sure how, or even why, the undead were connected to humanity's forgotten past. "Ready yourselves," Elias spoke in a low, commanding voice, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. "We don't know how much time we have before they find us." The survivors had already seen the zombies' strange behavior. Unlike any other plague, this one had a particular trait: the undead were drawn to memories. The survivors could feel it when they ventured outside. It was as if the zombies could sense the faintest trace of emotion in the air, like ghosts of the past lingering in the atmosphere. No one had been able to fully explain why, but the survivors had learned to adapt. Mira, a quiet but resourceful member of the group, studied an old, worn map of the city. She traced a line on the paper, her finger hovering over a location she had been to before. "There's a memory vault beneath the old library," she said, her voice steady. "It's rumored to hold the key to the past. If we can get to it, we might finally understand why the undead are targeting our memories." Elias nodded solemnly. The library had been a place of knowledge long before the world fell apart. Now, it stood as a silent monument to everything humanity had lost. Outside, the faint moans of the undead could be heard in the distance, their slow shuffle echoing through the empty streets. The survivors knew they couldn't waste any more time. The city was no longer a place of refuge, it was a battleground. "We move out in 10 minutes, Elias ordered. "Mira, gather the supplies. The rest of you, prepare for the worst. We don't know what we'll find in that vault, but it's our only chance." The tension in the air was thick as the group quickly gathered their belongings. Each of them knew the risks. The vault was deep beneath the city, and the path to it was treacherous. But their memories, what remained of them, were their only hope. Elias couldn't help but think about his own memories. Before the outbreak, he had been a historian, someone who devoted his life to preserving the past. But now, in this desolate world, history had become a weapon. A weapon they could wield against the very creatures who had stolen everything from them. "I remember a time when we thought we could control everything," Elias murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "But we were wrong. We didn't understand the power of memory, and now, it's our only weapon." As the group made their final preparations, a distant rumble shook the ground. A new wave of undead had entered the city, drawn by the memories of the survivors. The time to move was now. "Let's go," Elias said, his voice steely and resolute. "We fight with what we have left. We fight with our memories." The group set out, moving quickly and silently through the abandoned streets, their hearts heavy with the weight of the unknown. Behind them, the horde of zombies closed in, drawn by the very memories that had once defined humanity. In the darkness, there was only one certainty: the battle for survival had begun, and the past would be their greatest weapon, or their undoing. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, jagged and broken like the memories of those who had lived there. The survivors moved cautiously through the wreckage of buildings, their footsteps muffled by the overgrown weeds and shattered glass. Elias kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of distant groans and the shuffling of the undead reminded them that they were never truly alone. But today, they weren't just running from the zombies, they were hunting for answers. The Memory Keeper's journey took them through a maze of streets, the city's once familiar landmarks now unrecognizable. Mira led the way, her map in hand, her every step measured. Elias noticed her steady breathing, the calmness in her eyes. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a seeker, someone who understood the importance of what they were about to uncover. "Are we close?" asked Jonah, a former soldier who had joined the group after the fall of his unit. He scanned the street, his gun at the ready, his face hard as stone. "I don't like this place. It's too quiet." Mira nodded, pointing toward a building ahead. It was an old library, its grand entrance barely visible behind a pile of rubble. The vault was supposed to be beneath it, hidden deep in the foundations, a place untouched by time and the undead. But getting to it wouldn't be easy. "It's through the back entrance," Mira said, her voice low. "If we can get past the horde, we'll be inside in no time." The air grew thick with tension as they approached the library. The undead were always drawn to places of memory, to locations where their former lives had been defined. The library had once been a sanctuary of knowledge, a repository of human achievement. Now, it was a tomb. Elias couldn't help but feel a shiver run down his spine as they crossed the threshold of the decaying building. Inside, the smell of mold and decay filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile libraries of the past. The shelves, once filled with books, now stood empty, their contents long forgotten. The only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps on the cracked stone floors. "We need to hurry," Elias whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "They'll be coming soon." Jonah led the way, his rifle poised and ready. The group moved cautiously, their eyes constantly darting around for any sign of movement. Elias' mind raced with questions. What exactly was in this vault that had the power to repel the undead? And why had they been chosen to discover it? They reached the back of the library, where a large metal door stood ajar. The faint glow of a dying light flickered beyond it. Mira stepped forward, her hand resting on the doorframe. "It's here," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "This is it." Elias motioned for the others to gather around as Mira carefully pushed the door open. A cold breeze swept through the dark chamber beyond. They stepped inside, and the room seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The walls were lined with old, brittle paper scrolls and strange artifacts, memories preserved in physical form, relics from a time that had long since passed. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it lay a single object, a small, intricately carved box. The surface of the box shimmered with an unnatural light, as if it held a secret that no one had dared to uncover. Elias approached it slowly, his breath caught in his throat. "This is it," he murmured. "This is what we've been searching for." But before anyone could touch the box, the ground beneath them trembled. The walls seemed to groan as if the very building itself was alive. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, slow, shuffling, and unmistakably undead. They were drawn here, to the vault, just as they had been drawn to the survivors. "They're here," Jonah grunted, his eyes wide with alarm. Elias quickly stepped in front of the pedestal, his heart racing. "Get the box. We don't have time." Mira reached forward, her fingers brushing the surface of the box. As she touched it, a burst of energy surged through the room, knocking everyone back. The vault's walls seemed to close in, and the undead, once slow and disoriented, suddenly grew more focused, more intense. "This is it," Elias thought to himself, his mind spinning with the realization. The memories, the past, were coming alive, fueling both their survival and the rage of the undead. The undead were no longer mindless. They were memories, manifestations of everything they had once been. And the key to defeating them lay not just in physical weapons, but in their ability to unlock the deepest recesses of the past. The battle for the vault had just begun, and the survivors were about to learn that some memories were far more dangerous than they ever imagined. The energy from the box lingered in the air like static, crackling with a power that both exhilarated and terrified Elias. He could feel it in his bones, the undeniable connection between the past and the present. The undead, now moving with terrifying precision, were no longer mere flesh-eaters. They were something far more dangerous, manifestations of forgotten lives, resurrected through the very memories the survivors sought to preserve. Elias stumbled to his feet, his mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Mira was still standing by the pedestal, her hand resting on the box, her eyes wide with shock. She had unlocked something that connected the very essence of humanity's past to the creatures that now haunted them. "They're changing," Jonah shouted from the far corner of the room, his rifle aimed at the approaching horde of undead. But they were no longer just the mindless, lumbering figures they had been. The zombies were now moving in coordinated patterns, their vacant eyes focused and intent. They were learning, adapting. "Move!" Elias barked, snapping Mira out of her daze. "We can't stay here." The group scrambled to their feet as the first of the undead reached them. The library, once a silent sanctuary, had now become a battlefield. The survivors drew their weapons, Mira with a bow, Jonah with his rifle, and Elias with his makeshift machete. But even as they readied themselves for the inevitable fight, they couldn't help but feel the overwhelming sense that something more was at play. These weren't just zombies anymore. They were different. "Back to the vault," Elias shouted, motioning toward the doorway they had entered from. "We'll make our stand there." They fought their way toward the entrance, each step fraught with danger. The undead were close now, their steps heavy and deliberate. One of them, a tall man with graying hair and tattered clothing, shuffled forward faster than the others. His eyes, once lifeless, now gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. His mouth opened, but instead of the usual guttural growls, he spoke in a voice that sent a chill down Elias' spine. "You cannot escape the past," the man rasped, his voice hoarse yet clear. "It is in you, it is with you." Elias froze for a moment, his grip tightening around his machete. How could he speak? How could any of them speak? Did you hear that?" Mira whispered, her face pale. Jonah fired a shot, the bullet whizzing past the zombie's head, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he raised a hand, and the undead around them seemed to pause, as if waiting for his command. "This isn't just a mindless horde," Elias muttered, his mind racing. "They're being guided." The zombie leader, for that's what Elias now realized it was, stepped forward, its gaze locked onto him. "You're too late," it said again, its voice somehow more human than before. "The memories have awakened. The past will be your undoing." Myra's hand trembled as she notched an arrow in her bow, ready to fire. "We can't let him get any closer," she said, her voice filled with urgency. Elias gripped her shoulder. "No. We need answers. We need to understand how they're connected to the memories." Jonah, ever the pragmatist, was already moving, circling the group as he kept his rifle trained on the undead. "Forget answers. We need to survive first." The zombie leader's mouth twisted into what might have been a grin, and he took a step closer, his movements slow but deliberate. "Survival is an illusion," he said, his eyes locking onto Elias. "You cannot escape what you are." Suddenly, the room shook again, the floor beneath them trembling as if the very building itself was responding to the undead's presence. The survivors backed away, eyes darting to the ceiling, the walls, the doors. There was no escape. "Get to the back," Elias ordered. "Now." They ran, pushing through the narrow corridor, desperate to find any form of shelter, any way to stop the zombies from advancing. But as they reached the back of the library, they found themselves confronted with an impossible choice, a steep staircase leading deeper into the bowels of the building, or the same door they had entered, now blocked by the advancing undead. Mira glanced at Elias, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "The staircase, it's our only chance." Elias hesitated, torn. The staircase might lead them to safety, or it might lead them further into the heart of the darkness. But he knew they couldn't stay trapped in the library with the zombies closing in on them. "Move, now," he shouted, and the group sprinted toward the staircase, the sounds of the undead growing louder behind them. As they descended into the depths of the library, the air grew colder, the walls closing in around them. And in the darkness, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn deeper into the past, into a place where the line between memory and reality had long since blurred. The past was no longer just a story. It was alive. And it was hunting them. The darkness swallowed them as they descended further into the depths of the library. The staircase creaked beneath their weight, each step resonating through the cold, damp stone like a countdown to something unknown. Elias led the way, his machete gripped tightly in his hand, heart pounding in his chest. The air down here was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of their hurried footsteps and the occasional distant moan of the undead, still closing in on the surface above. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a narrow hallway, its walls lined with old, dust-covered bookshelves. The faint smell of decay filled the air, mingling with the mustiness of long-forgotten knowledge. It was a place that had been sealed off for generations, a sanctuary of the past, hidden from the ravages of time. But as they ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker awaited them. Mira, her bow still in hand, stopped in front of an old wooden door, its surface cracked and warped with age. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The vault." Elias approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the dark space beyond the door. He could feel the weight of the memories in this place, as though the walls themselves were saturated with the lives of those who had once lived in this city. These were memories that the undead were drawn to, memories they had somehow twisted and turned into something monstrous. Jonah moved to the front, his rifle aimed at the door, ready for anything that might emerge. "Should we just walk in?" he asked, a touch of sarcasm in his voice, though it was clear he didn't expect an answer. "We don't have a choice," Elias said grimly. He pushed the door open slowly, revealing a vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of ancient scrolls, strange artifacts, and odd contraptions that seemed to be built for purposes Elias couldn't comprehend. There were markings on the walls, symbols and runes that hinted at something far older than the world they now inhabited. This wasn't just a vault of knowledge. This was a tomb, a place meant to hide something from the world. Elias stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the surroundings, but he couldn't focus on the artifacts. His attention was drawn to a large stone pedestal in the center. Atop it was an object wrapped in a faded cloth, glowing faintly, its shape indistinct in the low light. "This is it," Mira breathed, stepping forward. "The source of the memories." But as she approached the pedestal, Elias caught sight of something strange. The undead were no longer just mindless creatures, they were drawn to this vault, their actions becoming more deliberate, more organized, as though they were trying to reach the very heart of the memories within. Elias felt it too, this sense that they were not alone, that something far darker than mere zombies was at play. Jonah, ever vigilant, raised his rifle. "Something's wrong," he muttered, scanning the room. "We're not alone." Elias tensed, his instincts flaring. He looked around, his eyes darting to the shadows in the corners of the room. Suddenly, the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with a malevolent force. And then, from the darkness, figures began to emerge, not zombies, but humans. Survivors, or at least they had been. Their faces were twisted, their eyes empty, and their bodies were marked with the same symbols Elias had seen etched into the walls of the vault. "They were once like us," Elias whispered, the realization sinking in. They were the original keepers of the memories. And they failed. The figures moved toward them, their bodies jerking and twitching with unnatural force, their lips parted in silent screams. It was clear now, these were the original guardians of the vault, transformed into something else entirely. Their memories, once a precious part of humanity, had been corrupted, twisted into vengeful spirits who now served the power that had awoken within the vault. Mira stepped back, her face pale with fear. "What are they?" "Memory beasts," Elias answered, his voice tight. "Creatures born from the remnants of human minds. They were meant to protect the vault, but now, they've become part of the curse." Jonah fired a shot at one of the approaching figures, but it only staggered backward before charging forward again. These creatures weren't like the undead, they could learn, adapt, and resist simple physical damage. "They're not just memories, they are memories," Elias realized. The vault had somehow given them power, a twisted form of immortality, by trapping the memories of the humans who had once guarded it. These memories had been corrupted over time, just as the undead had been drawn to the emotions of the living. Mira turned to Elias. What do we do? Elias looked at the memory beasts, his mind racing. We fight, but we don't kill them. We need to destroy the source, the object on the pedestal. If we don't, the memories will never stop. As the memory beasts closed in, their eyes locked on the survivors, Elias knew there was no turning back. They were in the heart of the darkness now, and to survive, they would have to confront the very thing that had turned their world upside down, the past. And the past, as they were about to find out, was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The chamber seemed to pulse with energy, each beat of its unnatural rhythm sinking deeper into Elias' chest. The memory beasts moved closer, their jerky, disjointed movements almost fluid as they closed in on the survivors. Their empty eyes, once human, now gleamed with an unholy fire, the last remnants of their former selves trapped inside their decayed forms. They were no longer just creatures driven by hunger, they were the echoes of the past, living memories that refused to die. Elias raised his machete, steeling himself. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the stench of forgotten lives. The stone walls of the vault seemed to close in on them, and for a moment, he wondered if they were about to become just another memory to be trapped in this cursed place. Jonah's rifle barked, its crack echoing in the cavernous space, but the shot barely fazed one of the beasts. It lunged forward, its movements unnervingly swift for its decayed body. Mira let out a shout as she fired an arrow, but the creature dodged, moving with an intelligence that sent a chill down her spine. These things aren't just mindless, they're thinking, Jonah growled, his eyes wide with disbelief. We need to focus on the pedestal. Elias shouted, his voice rough with urgency. The object on it, it's the key. If we destroy it, we destroy them. Mira was already on the move, darting past a memory beast as it reached for her. She leapt toward the pedestal, her bow raised, ready to shoot anything that got too close. But the creatures were closing in too quickly. One of them lunged at her, its hands outstretched, and Elias reacted on instinct. He darted forward, swinging his machete in a wide arc, severing the creature's outstretched arm. It howled in pain but didn't fall. Instead, it twisted its body unnaturally, retaliating with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so decayed. Mira, her face a mask of fear and determination, quickly grabbed the cloth-wrapped object from the pedestal. It was lighter than she had expected, and as she held it, she could feel a strange hum, almost like the heartbeat of the entire room. It pulsed against her skin, resonating with something deep within her. What is it? Jonah asked, his voice strained as he fired again, narrowly missing a memory beast. I don't know, but I can feel it, Mira said, her hands shaking as she inspected the object. It was ancient, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change before her eyes. It's tied to them, to everything. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the air, and the room trembled. Elias spun around, his heart racing. The memory beasts were moving in unison now, their previously chaotic movements synchronized in a way that made their collective presence even more terrifying. They're reacting to the object. Elias realized, his breath catching in his throat. It's drawing them in, like a beacon. The room seemed to close in on them. The creatures were no longer just attacking, they were circling, trapping them in a slowly tightening noose. Elias looked at Mira, then at Jonah, their faces pale with fear but filled with a resolve that he hadn't seen in them before. They understood now, this was their only chance. We need to destroy it, Elias said, his voice a low growl. It's the only way to stop them. Mira hesitated, the object still pulsing in her hands. But, if we destroy it, won't we destroy the memories? The past? Elias shook his head. The past is already dead. These things, he motioned to the memory beasts, they're the corrupted remnants of what we left behind. If we don't end this, they'll keep coming, and the cycle will never stop. We have to break the chain. With a nod, Mira raised the object high, her eyes locking onto the nearest memory beast. If this is the only way to end it, then so be it. But just as she was about to strike, a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted in the faint light from the pedestal. Elias' heart skipped a beat as he saw who it was. Wait! The voice was familiar, raspy and hoarse. Don't destroy it. You don't understand. It was a man, a survivor, like them. He staggered into the room, his clothes tattered, his eyes wide with a desperate madness. He was holding something, a broken piece of the same object Mira had just picked up. No, the man shouted, his voice full of fear. If you destroy it, you'll undo everything. All the memories, the history, it's the only way we can remember what happened. The world needs this knowledge, even if it means these things live on. Elias stared at him, torn. The man's words rang with an eerie truth, but the weight of the creatures closing in around them was undeniable. They didn't have time to debate the ethics of memory and survival. Don't listen to him. Jonah shouted, his voice sharp with panic. We don't have the luxury of time. If we don't stop them, they'll destroy us. The man took a step forward, his eyes wild. You don't know what you're dealing with. He lunged at the pedestal, but Elias was quicker. With a single, fluid motion, he knocked the man aside, sending him sprawling across the floor. Destroy it, Mira, Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Now. And with that, the object in Mira's hands shattered, the light within it flaring as the ground beneath them trembled once more. The moment Mira's hands shattered the object, the entire vault seemed to collapse in on itself. A blinding light erupted from the remains, illuminating the chamber with an intensity that made even the memory beasts pause, their bodies writhing in confusion. The pulse that had been humming within the object grew deafening, vibrating through the air, through the stone walls, through their very bones. The survivors could barely keep their eyes open as the light swallowed them whole. Elias threw up his arm to shield his eyes, but even with his vision obscured, he could feel the overwhelming power radiating from the broken object. It wasn't just the object that was disintegrating, it was the very fabric of the vault itself, as though the memories it had been housing were suddenly tearing free from the bonds that had kept them locked away for so long. The memory beasts were caught in the eruption, their forms distorting as the light flooded the room. They staggered, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, as though they were being pulled apart. Their empty eyes, once burning with a savage intelligence, flickered, first with confusion, then with something else, something deeper, more tragic. For a fleeting moment, Elias saw a glimmer of humanity in their gaze before it was consumed entirely by the force of the blast. Mira stumbled back, the force of the light knocking her to the ground. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, but the object was gone, reduced to nothing more than shattered fragments and glowing embers. She gasped for breath, her heart racing in the aftermath of the explosion. The world around her was silent, save for the soft crackling of the remnants of the object. Mira! Elias shouted, rushing to her side. His hands grasped her shoulders, shaking her gently to make sure she was unharmed. The world felt unreal, like a dream. Are you okay? She nodded, blinking against the aftereffects of the light, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I think so, she murmured, her voice shaky. But her eyes darted nervously to the remains of the memory beasts. They were still there, though they were no longer the mindless creatures they had been before. The bodies of the beasts were now contorted in strange ways, their once terrifying forms reduced to a grotesque heap of flesh and bone, like echoes of something that had never been whole. The light had fragmented them, the memories trapped inside them now scattered to the winds. For a moment, the room felt eerily still. Jonah, who had been crouching near the entrance, lowered his rifle. Did it work? He asked, his voice thick with skepticism. Elias looked at the beast's remains, and for the first time since entering the vault, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The creatures weren't moving. They weren't advancing. They had ceased to exist, in a sense. It was as though the very core of their being had been stripped away. It worked, Elias said, his voice steady. We stopped them. But as the dust began to settle, there was an unsettling shift in the air. Myra's gaze was fixed on something beyond the vault, something in the farthest corner, half hidden by the shadows. Elias followed her gaze, his heart sinking. There, in the farthest recesses of the room, an altar was emerging from the darkness, old and weathered, but distinct in its architecture. What's that? Jonah asked, stepping forward, his voice low. Before Elias could answer, a sudden, guttural noise pierced the silence, low, vibrating, like the growl of something waking from a deep slumber. It came from deep within the altar. The survivors froze. The memory beasts, despite their destruction, had left something behind, something far older, far more dangerous. Elias had known it was never truly over, that the past was a force that could never be fully erased. This was just the beginning of something far darker than they had anticipated. Suddenly, a figure stepped forward from the shadows, its silhouette tall and imposing. The figure was not fully human, but something else, something worse. It wore tattered robes, its face obscured by a mask-like structure. It was the last of the keepers, the ones who had once guarded the memories of humanity. But now, twisted by time and corruption, they had become something more than human. They had become the embodiment of the past itself. The figure raised a long, gnarled staff, its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. "You think you've won?" the figure rasped, its voice like the grinding of stone. "You've only unleashed what was meant to stay buried. The memories were never meant to be erased. They were the foundation of all that we are. Without them, you have nothing." Elias stepped forward, his machete in hand, his mind racing. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming sense of dread. "The past is dead. We have to move forward, not live in the shadow of what came before." The keeper's laugh echoed through the chamber, hollow and cold. "Then you will fail. The past never dies. It waits. It always waits." With that, the keeper raised its staff, and the entire room trembled once more. The battle was far from over. The struggle for humanity's survival had only just begun. The keeper's presence was overwhelming. As it stood, towering over the survivors, the air around them seemed to freeze, like time itself had stopped. The energy in the vault, once chaotic and violent, now pulsed in a more controlled rhythm, as though the keeper's very being commanded it. Mira felt an oppressive weight settle on her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. Her hand was still trembling from the destruction of the object, but now her focus had shifted entirely. The fight was far from over. Elias, machete in hand, took a slow step forward. His grip tightened on the handle, his knuckles turning white. Jonah, ever the pragmatist, checked his rifle, his jaw set in grim determination. They couldn't afford to hesitate, not with the keeper standing before them, ready to unleash whatever horrors it had guarded for so long. "What do you want from us?" Elias shouted, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "We've destroyed your damn relic. Let us go." The keeper tilted its head slightly, as though considering the question. Its glowing eyes fixed on Elias with an unsettling, almost sadistic gaze. "You don't understand, do you?" it rasped. "You can destroy the memories, destroy the relics, but you can never truly rid yourselves of them. The past has a way of crawling back, clawing its way to the surface." Myra's heart hammered in her chest. She had heard stories, ancient tales of those who tried to erase their past only to find it haunting them in ways they never expected. But this felt different. This felt like something older than even the world they knew, something beyond time and reason. Enough with the riddles, Jonah snapped, raising his rifle, his finger poised on the trigger. "If you want to fight, then fight." Before Jonah could pull the trigger, the keeper raised its staff, and the chamber shuddered once more. A deafening crack filled the air, as if the very walls of the vault were splitting open. From the cracks, shadows poured, thick and inky, swirling like smoke, taking form as they materialized. More figures, more twisted, broken creatures emerged from the darkness, their movements just as erratic as the memory beasts had been, but this time, there was no hesitation in their eyes. These were the true guardians of the memories, manifestations of the past itself, summoned to protect whatever the keeper had been entrusted with. Elias didn't hesitate. "Get ready," he yelled, motioning for everyone to take cover. The keeper's army of shadows had emerged, and they weren't waiting for an invitation to attack. Jonah's rifle cracked again, this time catching one of the shadowy figures in the chest. The shot didn't faze it. The creature simply passed through the bullet, reforming its shape without missing a beat. Damn it! Jonah swore. We need something stronger. Don't waste your ammo. Mira shouted, pulling an arrow from her quiver. They're not physical. They're memories, just like the beasts. We need to destroy the source, not fight them directly. Elias cursed under his breath, scanning the room. The keeper stood at the center, raising its staff again as more shadows swirled and churned around it, blocking their path. It was drawing on the power of the past, using the memories to create an impenetrable defense. They couldn't defeat the shadows without cutting off the source. The keeper had to be stopped. There! Mira shouted, pointing to a distant alcove, hidden in the farthest corner of the vault. There's something in there. I think it's where the keeper's drawing its power from. Stay close, Elias ordered, taking the lead as they sprinted toward the alcove, the shadows lunging at them from all sides. Each shadow tried to latch onto their bodies, but Elias slashed at them with his machete, his strikes barely making contact. He could feel the cold touch of the past trying to drag him down, pulling at his soul, reminding him of things he'd long buried. Jonah was close behind, his rifle raised, firing off shots at the swirling shadows. We're running out of time, he shouted. Mira was next to Elias, her bow drawn, an arrow ready. The alcove, now, she urged, her voice tight with fear. They reached the alcove, but the shadows closed in fast. Elias ducked under a sweeping tendril, his breath ragged. Keep pushing, he yelled, almost desperate. The alcove's walls were lined with ancient inscriptions, symbols that pulsed with the same eerie light as the object Mira had destroyed. The power's here, Mira said, recognizing the symbols from her earlier research. These are the runes that bind the memories. If we destroy them, we can sever the keeper's hold. Elias didn't waste a second. He swung his machete at the wall, the blade striking the stone with a resounding crack. The runes glowed brightly, then shattered, the glow dying as the magic holding the shadows together began to unravel. The shadows screeched, their forms destabilizing, losing their coherence. But the keeper was not finished. With a roar of pure fury, the keeper's staff erupted in a brilliant flash of light, and the shadows surged forward, moving faster than ever before. The battle was far from over. The past was fighting back, fighting for its survival. And Elias, Mira, and Jonah had no choice but to keep fighting, keep pushing forward, until the past was nothing more than dust. Destroy it! Elias shouted, eyes wild with determination. Mira pulled another arrow from her quiver, her aim steady as she released it toward the keeper, the final battle beginning in earnest. The keeper's roar of fury echoed through the vault, its voice reverberating like the crash of thunder. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that seemed to warp reality itself. Elias could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet, as if the very foundation of the vault was struggling to maintain its integrity. The shadows surged forward, relentless, their movements faster and more aggressive now that the keeper's staff had unleashed their full force. But there was no going back now. Myra's arrow whistled through the air, striking the keeper square in the chest. The impact caused the figure to stagger back slightly, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The keeper's form rippled, distorting like a wave crashing against a rock. Its glowing eyes narrowed as it steadied itself, unperturbed by the attack. Is that all you've got? The keeper hissed, its voice a venomous rasp. Elias charged forward, his machete raised. You're not the one in control here anymore, he growled, slashing at the keeper's form. Each strike made contact, but it was as if the keeper were made of mist, the blade passing through it without doing any real damage. Jonah was right behind him, firing his rifle once more. The bullets hit their mark, but just like before, they passed right through the keeper's ephemeral form. The keeper's laughter filled the vault, chilling them to their core. You cannot defeat what you cannot touch, it taunted. The past is eternal. You cannot erase it. You cannot outrun it. But Mira wasn't listening to the keeper's words. Her eyes were fixed on the runes surrounding the alcove, the symbols still glowing faintly. They were the key, the source of the keeper's power. If they could destroy the runes, they could sever the Keeper's hold over the shadows and everything that had been unleashed. Mira! Elias shouted, seeing where her focus was. The runes! We need to destroy the last of them. Mira nodded, determination hardening her expression. She reached for another arrow, her fingers steady despite the chaos around them. As she knocked the arrow into her bow, she noticed the Keeper's form shifting again, this time coiling around them like a serpent. The shadows were closing in. I need a clear shot. Mira yelled. Elias and Jonah didn't hesitate. They rushed forward, swinging their weapons and firing at the Keeper's form, forcing it back just enough for Mira to take aim. The vault seemed to grow quieter, the shadows retreating slightly in response to their desperate push. The Keeper's anger was palpable, its presence filling the room like a suffocating cloud, but Mira had one shot. With a steady breath, she pulled the string of her bow back, her eyes locked on the final rune. She released. The arrow flew through the air like a comet, its trajectory unwavering. The moment it struck the rune, a deafening crack sounded, louder than any of the previous explosions. The rune shattered, the light that had been pulsating around the vault flickering and dimming. The shadows that had been closing in suddenly recoiled, as if they had been burned. The Keeper's form began to fracture, the once imposing figure breaking apart like a glass statue under a heavy blow. The shadows, too, began to unravel, their swirling forms collapsing into nothingness. The vault shook violently as the very fabric of the past was torn from its grasp. No, the Keeper screeched, its voice growing desperate. But it was too late. The vault trembled one final time, then fell silent. The last of the shadows vanished, the air cleared, and the oppressive weight that had hung over them lifted. Mira, Elias, and Jonah stood, breathing heavily, their bodies sore from the intense battle. They could feel the heat of the vault slowly fading, replaced by an eerie calm. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water and the echo of their own breaths. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice hoarse. Is it over? Mira nodded slowly, her hand still gripping her bow. Her eyes scanned the vault, but there was no sign of the Keeper or the shadows. Only the wreckage of the object they had destroyed and the runes now reduced to dust. It's over, she said, though there was a weariness in her voice. She had no idea what this victory truly meant. They had stopped the Keeper, but had they truly eradicated the past's influence, or had they merely postponed its return? Jonah stepped forward, his rifle slung over his shoulder. We're still alive, he said, his tone pragmatic. That's what matters. We survived. Elias looked at his companions, his eyes hard with resolve. Yeah, he said, his voice steady. But the past will always be there, waiting for the next chance to rise again. We need to keep moving forward, no matter what. We've seen what happens when we don't. The three of them walked out of the vault, leaving behind the shattered remnants of a forgotten history. As they emerged into the open air, the sun's rays broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the ruins of the world. There was still hope for a future beyond the shadows of the past. But Elias knew deep down that this fight, like so many others, was far from over. The past was never truly gone, it only waited, in the darkness, for the right moment to return.